Welcome to Inside the Deal. I'm Trent Ziegler, your host, and this is where we're going to break down how real operators are actually building, scaling, and closing deals in real estate today. Today, I'm joined by Philip Carey, COO at Bold Fox Development. Appreciate you being here.
Thanks, Trent. Appreciate you having me.
Yeah, man. Let's dive right in. For the viewers, what does the typical day in real estate development look like? What does it entail at a high level?
Yeah, so for us, Bold Fox, we're master plan community developers, and then I also am a partner at a firm called Walnut Creek, which is strictly a commercial kind of acquisition company. Do a little bit of development there, mostly on self storage and industrial assets. So for us, it's I'm on the operations side, so a lot of time out in the field and managing. Our project managers, meetings with our engineers, really just understanding the plans and really trying to move the project along in terms of, timeline and budget, right?
Yeah, 100%. So the one that gets things done. You push the ball. You make sure the ball's rolling.
Yeah, as best as we can, right? There's a lot of guys that work really hard to put our projects together. We kind of tell people we like building the American dream, helping people build the American dream, and these are large scale projects. We couldn't do it without a handful of people that work with us, for us, consultants, third parties, engineers, kind of the whole shebang.
Yeah, absolutely, of course. So give me the quick backstory. How did you get where you are today? Originally from Canada, right?
I am, yeah, yeah. I came, had a short-lived baseball career. Got to play a little baseball. Played in your neck of the woods over at Winthrop University in Rock Hill, South Carolina, and then transferred into Texas A&M. I live in College Station still, where A&M is. So proud Aggie. And
Nice.
you know, life after baseball came a little bit sooner than I would have liked,
Mhm.
and really just kind of started flipping homes with a couple guys in the off season. And from there it was like, okay, after a couple rounds of some home flips, it was like, how do we do this a little bit more at scale? We don't really want to be in the houses as much doing the work. So we started kind of hiring out some GCs and some contractors for us. And then turn that into a home building company. And then in home building, the value there is really in the land and lot positions and the future pipeline of the business. And
Mhm.
we just naturally kind of gravitated towards the development side, right? We wanted to underwrite land, see where we could build houses. And then we kind of got crossed with a decision on whether or not we wanted to scale a home building company or a development company. And development definitely suited our skill set a little bit better, in terms of, we could keep our team lean and go look at a bunch of good jobs, right? Nothing wrong with home building. It's a great business. They're obviously imperative for our industry. But we really like the land side of things. I'm a dirt guy, so
Yeah.
land is fun. And we are kind of able to take the competitive sports approach to our business, right? You drive by a piece of land and it might be, the best property you see, and you're like, how come that hasn't been developed yet? What's wrong with it, right? And we want to solve those problems, right? So anyway, we have a lot of fun with it. It's great. And we're really trying to drive, highest and best use, drive some taxable value. And for us, I'm very fortunate that we're here in Texas. We have a lot of creative financing solutions for us kind of middle market developers to take advantage of. That's really it. But we love land. I love underwriting land. I love trying to figure out how to get water, sewer, and utilities to a site, and how the property drains, and that it's kind of a chess game, right? And we really like doing that.
It's a problem solver by nature.
Yeah, yeah. Try to be. Doesn't always work out that way, right?
Yeah.
But we do what we can.
Yeah, of course. So in the industry, zooming out a little bit, what major shifts are you seeing in your industry right now, specifically in your area in Texas?
Yeah, like Texas is, it's always I'm gonna say, like I said, I'm fortunate to be here. It's a pretty hot market. I think we're removed from, I think, maybe some of the larger macro issues that different parts of the country are seeing, right? But I think in general, it's a great place to develop, right? There's a lot of growth here. It's been pretty consistent over the last decade. But what we're seeing is probably not too different than a lot of places, right? Like, I mean, coming out of a post-COVID world, right? Costs are high, land values are only getting higher, right? Deals are harder and harder to pencil.
Mhm.
So where we feel like we do a good job is really setting up and creating special districts that support our projects. And that's a big tool that we have available to us. And I think what we're starting to see is that there's more opportunity for middle market guys like ourselves, to go and capitalize on some opportunities. We in the last 2 years we've done two launch bonds. Not too sure if you're very familiar with that, but essentially we were able to forward sell reimbursements. And, essentially that allowed us to, put in the infrastructure and essentially get reimbursed for that infrastructure. So what you're seeing is the capital outlay just isn't as strenuous over the course of the development, right? And so it's allowed us on both properties, both developments that we're actively working on right now to pay down our senior lender and to keep the project moving forward. And in turn, not have as much debt, or equity out on our balance sheet for as long, right? But we can kind of move in and out of projects a little bit faster now because of some of these tools that are available to us.
Yeah, awesome. They said setting up special districts. What do you
Yeah,
mean
so
by that?
yeah, special districts. So here we kind of play in the mud world, right? So we have muds and we have PIDs and there's TERSs and there's all these different agreements. And um, I'll give you a good example. A few years ago, we were doing a development. We closed the deal before COVID. And COVID happened, and costs skyrocketed, right, on us. 30%. I think we had 15 or 20% contingency built into our budget, so we busted our budget. But we were able to negotiate some really nice agreements and some incentive agreements with both our water district and the municipality that we were building in. And it kind of added this extra layer of protection, right? And so that was a side agreement. But the special district world is, essentially when you set these districts up, the districts actually own the infrastructure. And so, if you live in a community that has a special assessment tied to it, right? You might live in a community right now with like an HOA fee, right?
Mhm. Right.
Well, there's an additional fee that gets levied on your lot, that's a district to essentially the district owns that stuff. And you can, we can go ahead and sell bonds, based off of the essentially the unrealized fees. There's an owner. So maybe $1,000 a month goes into, to the mud, right? It's a 30-year assessment times 800 homeowners. There's a lot of future revenue that's going to be coming into that district, and we can sell bonds to finance that infrastructure.
Okay. Gotcha. Gotcha. Nice. So, given any of these major shifts that we've been talking about, how has that impacted your business or your growth strategy?
I think there's a lot of properties that, we can look at now that maybe we would have passed on in the future, so it's allowed us to look at some maybe larger scale projects. And I think that's, like I said, I think that's obviously, pretty big for us. I'm going to say small guys, but um, like we're actively shopping, right? We're always actively shopping. And I think that's a big part just to kind of keep the wheels turning and keep everything moving downhill, right?
Yeah, it's a good place to be, actively shopping.
Yeah, yeah.
So what's working well for you specifically in your company right now? I know you said that you guys are really good at setting up these special districts. But what else are you guys doing that maybe other people aren't in the area?
Um, like the development game's a large space, right? I think we have a really good team. I think we do a good job delivering lots to our builders, but like we like to create meaningful places, right? So we're attention to detail. I think there you can only afford so much, I think, when you're doing these communities, but we really try to think about the homeowner first, right? And creating a place that they're going to be proud to call home, right? So, whether it's monumentation at the front, whether it's a little bit of extra architecture that goes, landscape architecture to make, the streets where they're not all, grid patterned and squared and they have some, sense of arrival, right? When people are coming home, like things like that. Like we try not to cut corners and we try to make sure that we leave a lot of room for amenities or open spaces or park spaces and, places, families can enjoy, outside of just, living in between a couple walls, right? And a roof. So, we take that to heart, and, we try to do a good job delivering, beautiful communities.
Yeah, absolutely. And how is that? Because I mean, so you're carrying this with you and into everything that you do. You're carrying the homeowner or the mindset of helping the individual homeowner into everything that you do, and maybe that's not realized in your work. So I guess how does that translate? How does that make you feel, or how has that made you feel over time?
Yeah, I mean these communities are going to be here a lot longer than I am, right? So, it's important to get them set up the right way, right? So the districts, for example, like, making sure, like the MUDs, right? I mean, when you're living in that community, that's a an additional cost that homeowners have to essentially they don't have access to it, but the MUD can continue to make improvements, right? If they're maintaining a detention pond because they own that facility, right? Things like that are important. When you're setting up your HOAs, right? That's important, when you're thinking about the homeowner, right? Making sure that, you know, somebody can't paint their house pink, right?
Yeah,
And all of a sudden you're like, oh man, what's going on here? Or, animals or, regular cleaning and things like that. I think just making sure that those things are set up on the front end is really important if you're going to maintain the integrity of the neighborhood. So like I said, that's kind of what we're doing. And, if we're spending a good bit of time doing that. I think it does translate years down the road. Just again, like I said, maintaining the integrity of the neighborhood, right, in our developments.
yeah, absolutely. So with that, what's been frustrating, or where have your hangups been as of the past 6 months?
Um, I can't really say that there's some big hangups, right? I mean, I'm talking to the guy right now that's utilizing AI, right? I mean, this is a huge curve for us. It's new, right? So we're spending some time in some areas that I think haven't been traditional or historical you know we just haven't spent a lot of time doing it in the past, right? It's new, right? And we're trying to figure out how do we evolve with it, what tools are helpful, how can we do a better job? I think for us, like, I think like any entrepreneur or any small business owner, we don't want to get left in the dust, right? And we want to feel like we're always getting better and we're improving our processes. And so that's a big part of it, right? So, frustration for me is I'm not a tech guy, right? I'm not going to pretend I am. I'm rooted in relationships and, all that other stuff, right? So, I think that's a learning curve for us, right? And you're spending a lot of time trying to figure out what works and how it fits into what you're doing and your operations. And I'd be lying if I told you I didn't get frustrated with it, every once in a while now that I'm spending a little bit more time behind a computer.
Hmm.
Uh, but I like the ops side because I like being outside. I like seeing
Yeah,
things being built. I like, having the relationships with the people that are, making it all happen for us. And now I'm trying to figure out, what Claude can do next, right?
yeah, right. So, I mean, talking about AI, what have you guys seen, or what areas have you seen AI improve your business so far?
Yeah, man, it's unbelievable. Like it really is. I'd say, before, right? Like, when you're kind of on the land acquisition side or you're land speculating, we used to drive in a car and spend a few hours and try to understand the area, who's there, what's being built around there, what the road access looks like to a site. um, we can do a lot of that stuff behind a computer now. We're still doing it, but I think there's, it's just the speed and access to information, right? And we can do kind of preliminary market studies. We can try to figure things out online. We can, it takes a lot less time for us to figure out what a tax rate looks like in said community, right? Think all things like that when we're checking our due diligence box. So we're using it for, due diligence for sure. Obviously, marketing's a huge tool, right? Whether we're, if we're out there raising capital, we got, building in, our CRM systems and follow-ups and, just making that look a little bit better and work a little bit better. So communication, I think, is big, and there's a lot of really good tools out there. You can build them yourself on the communication side. Um, you know, Whether it's investor relations or it's just follow-ups or it's scheduling meetings or there's so much stuff that we can do with it, right? And just like I said, trying to figure out how all those pieces kind of fit together to make us more effective so we can spend more time doing the stuff that we feel like we really need to be doing, right? Which is solving the problems of the ups, of the properties. So I think we look at as where are the areas where we can get time back,
Mhm.
right? And I think that's probably how a lot of people are looking at it. We're not looking at it as a way for us to commercialize and make money. It's just, can we be more effective? Can we do more with less? Um, but yeah, marketing's big. Underwriting, right? I already said kind of in the due diligence, right? We can create a bunch of models. We can run our back of the napkins. I'm spending a lot less time on Excel early on into projects,
Yeah.
now and being able to run these models and make tweaks to them. And yeah, it's unbelievable. It's quick.
Yeah. Well, shifting out of AI a little bit, talking about the future, where do you want to be, 6, 12, 18 months from now in your business and what you're doing?
Yeah, so like I said, we're actively shopping right now for some new dirt. So I'd like to get a couple new acquisitions under our belt. We're closing a really nice self-storage facility in August, right? So a lot of attention is on, getting that across the finish line. And like I said, we've done things, we at least for our business, right? We've raised capital through the friends and family route, for you know my whole career, right? And we're looking at some opportunities at moving more into the I'm going to say institutional bucket or you know middle market family office market, right? Just streamline the capital raise for us, just because we do have a nice pipeline over the next 12 to 18 months. So we're looking at ways to acquire more properties, right? And trying to be a little more creative with that, right? Now that we've gotten a handful of deals, full cycle. We've been in and out of a lot of different assets now. Um, so we're going to focus on exploring that opportunity a little bit further, and maybe it could be accretive to our business.
Right. Okay. Well, if you had a magic wand to fix one thing in your business that's holding you back or slowing you down, or if you had a magic wand to accelerate your
Yeah.
your goal accomplishment, what would that magic wand be?
Um, I would probably have two magic wands, right? Magic wand number one is capital, right? I think, finding the right deal for the right group is I'm sure most developers can resonate with that, right? And then number two would be I wish we had more land, right? God's not making any more of it. and we're it's finding the right properties. It's funny, like, being in a business for as long as we have, right? I kind of feel like from where I started, right, you had all these properties that were available, and then now they're starting to be developed, right? And so as you kind of work along that curve, right, you're kind of dealing with, I would say, not less desirable properties, but potentially ones that are, maybe have a little bit more hair on them, or, 10 years ago, they weren't in the path of growth and now they are, right? So we're underwriting new areas. But, what I've learned is like no two pieces of property are the same, right? You gotta figure out, you gotta work them. You gotta figure out, where the challenges are, and how do you solve those problems? And then just solving those problems, you know, doesn't make financial sense, right? But yeah, that's probably it. I think, it's not easy finding good pieces of dirt. For us on the commercial side, we're constantly battling, if properties go to market, right? If we're competing against, institutional or private REITs, right? Their cost of capital might be a little bit more favorable than ours. So very seldomly are we the high bidder, right? So that's part of it too. But good deals are hard to come by. You got to work hard to go get them.
Right. All right. Well, closing out here, what advice would you have for somebody getting into property development or land development, rather?
Yeah. Well, I do it land or commercial, right? I mean, I think constantly be learning. I think and learn from your mistakes. These are very intricate projects. You go through any construction project, there's thousands of line items, right? You're not going to get them all right, right? And you gotta tackle them, and you gotta be able to respond, quickly. And like, learn from your mistakes. I think to us, I think it's trying not to make the same mistake twice, right? In our business, I think sometimes goes a long way, and I think just communication is key, right? And as I told you, I like working with a small team because there's I think a little bit less gets lost in translation,
Mhm.
right? And maybe a little bit easier to stay on top of things, and more importantly, like, surround yourself with good people, right? I mean, people that you trust, people that you care about, hard workers. Um, I think that goes a long way too, right? I think those are three kind of recipes for success. And you can't be scared to fail, right? Fear of failure, right? We've heard about that too, and
Right.
uh, that's an important one as well. But I think we I try to wake up in the morning and you know try to go through, take a few minutes and think about what's on my plate for today, and how I can go kind of compete, right? And that's you know my own little kind of morning ritual that I do, or
Yeah.
routine that I do. But I think having something like that also helps. But and then more importantly, create a plan. Like when I first started doing this, it was a very deal by deal, get done with the deal. Okay, what's next? It wasn't like we put together a 5-year business plan on, hey, here's where we are today and here's where we're trying to go. And this means that we got to do X amount of acquisitions, annually or quarterly or however you want to do it. But I think spending the time and setting realistic goals, I think, can be very helpful. It's helpful for us. It allows you to kind of evaluate, where you are at any given point in a calendar year, or, whether you're doing it quarterly or biannually or annually or anything like that. I think that's important because you get so lost in the details sometimes on these projects. Time goes by really fast, and you're like, man, I just really feel like, you know, I didn't get a lot done this month, or we didn't move this project along as far as we needed to. But when you can kind of take a step back, right, and look at it, on a larger plan, I think, that can be a big stress reliever that you are making meaningful progress.
Right. think there's just a lot of, land development aside, lots of wisdom in there. Lots of wisdom in all those words. Don't be afraid to fail. That's one of my favorite things. And some that's Bible knowledge, right? Like the
Yep.
Bible says, what is it? 365 times, one for every day of the year. Like, do not be afraid, right? So awesome.
Yep.
Lots of
Yep.
wisdom there. Well, yeah, where can people find you at, Phil?
People can find me in let's see here at a local diner by any of our projects for coffee or lunch. No, online, LinkedIn, or email. I don't know if you're posting contact information, but usually pretty responsive with email or just through a LinkedIn channel. Um, and I'm always happy to chat, right? And see if there's anywhere where we can help or be of an assistance to anyone, right? Like we like fee-based development, we like development, we like doing joint venture partnerships. There's a lot of different ways that we can help. I'm going to say emerging sponsors. Uh, we I still think of myself as one, but yeah, we're happy to help and always willing to take a call and see if we can help a neighbor.
Awesome. Well, thanks for coming on today, Phil, and giving us some insight into your operations. And yeah, as I always say, knowledge is wealth. Let's spread the wealth. Thanks for tuning in, guys.
All right. Thanks.